The era of villainy, embracing the path of all too necessary truths. The concept of the villain era has emerged in modern discourse as a way to describe a period in life where individuals reject societal expectations of self sacrifice and compliance and people pleasing in favor of asserting boundaries, speaking hard truths, and embracing personal power. While the term itself may carry a negative connotation, the deeper philosophy behind it is far from malicious. In many spiritual, philosophical, and religious traditions, there exists the idea that some individuals are called to deliver difficult lessons, to challenge the status quo, and to embody the necessary force of change. This video will explore the concepts of the era of villainy through the lens of various religious teachings, philosophical traditions, and psychological perspectives, ultimately arguing that stepping into this role is not an act of evil, but is a personal necessity and a spiritual duty. The role of the villain in society. Throughout history, figures who have stood firm in their truths, who have refused to conform, and who have challenged oppressive systems have often been labeled as villains. Socrates, Jesus, the Buddha, countless revolutionaries were seen as threats to the established order because they spoke truths that disrupted uncomfortable things that needed to be said to disrupt these comfortable illusions. Their teachings, though often met with resistance and hostility, were ultimately meant to guide humanity towards higher awareness and justice. If you ever watched Jesus rebuke the priests or the Pharisees, then you know what I'm talking about. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self explains why society often projects its fears onto those who refuse to comply. Those in their era of villainy embody the necessary confrontation with truth, forcing others to acknowledge their own darkness and their shortcomings. By embracing the role of the villain, one can act as a catalyst for transformation, both personally and collectively. And trust me, it comes not a moment too soon. Boundaries and self-preservation as spiritual traditions. In Christianity, there is the righteous anger of Christ, which I just alluded to. Though Christianity often preaches compassion and forgiveness, Jesus himself demonstrated the importance of righteous anger and setting boundaries. In the cleansing of the temple, Matthew 21, verses 12 to 13, Jesus overturned tables and drove out the merchants who were defiling a sacred space. And I've had many debates on my videos with people about this, that they weren't being violent at the time. They weren't whipping any merchants or throwing them around, that Jesus would never do that. But the reality is he was very firm that they disrespected his father in his sacred home, the temple. And so this message has to be received. He was ultimately crucified for his strong stances. His role was not to be loved, but to fulfill a higher purpose. Similarly, those in their era of villainy may find themselves misunderstood or rejected. This does not mean they are on the wrong path. For example, let's take Buddhism. In Buddhism, we have the path of detachment. In Buddhist philosophy, suffering arises from attachment, including attachment to others' opinions and expectations. The Buddha himself rejected a life of indulgence and later a life of extreme asceticism to find the middle way. He challenged the rigid structures of his time, emphasizing personal enlightenment over blind adherence to rules, codes, and traditions. Those who embrace their era of villainy can learn from this detachment. By releasing the need for validation, by focusing on their inner truth, they align more closely with the Buddhist ideal of liberation. Speaking hard truths and setting boundaries are acts of self-compassion and personal enlightenment, even if they lead to temporary discomfort for oneself and others. I found this to be a recurring theme in some relationships that I've had, that I realized that When you put too much emphasis on attachment, you fall into the trap. And the trap is that you can't wait for others to praise you. You can't wait for others to be your hero. You can't wait for others to put you on a pedestal. They're not going to. You either are comfortable with yourself and who you are and know who you are and demand respect, or you don't. And so if we look at Taoism, the Taoist sage does not seek approval but follows their intrinsic nature. For those experiencing their era of villainy, Taoism offers the wisdom of effortless action, which is known as Wu Wei. This means you cannot force yourself into society's molds. Instead, you must embrace your role naturally, whether it be as a nurturer or a disruptor. You can't make people lovely, but you will make them respect you. You get rid of stagnant air. You don't look to the norms and maintaining balance. You live life on your terms the way you need it to be lived. And if others can't get with the program, that's a problem for them. Carl Jung's theory of the shadow self suggests that every person has aspects of their psyche that is often suppressed due to societal conditioning. In other words, society wants you to act a certain way. Society may tell you, oh, why aren't you married by now? Oh, what are you doing getting that job? You should get an education. Oh, why did you get that house? You should have gotten another house in the other part of town. And so on and so forth. And so you become repressed. You, instead of having a healthy outlook on life, you're too busy people pleasing and trying to cater to human emotions, and you don't know how to assert your own without guilt. Well, you must. Being an empath is especially a dangerous place to be because you always want to help people feel better, but you can't. You need to let that go. You need to have a cutoff game that's strong. You need to come back as a changed person. Even if you follow Machiavelli, you have the force that challenges you and pushes you towards growth. Stepping into this villain era means becoming the force that others need to face. Whether it's by saying no, by setting boundaries, by challenging toxic behaviors, refusing to be a victim of toxic behaviors. You play a villain in someone else's story, and this is an unavoidable step in your own heroic evolution. Sometimes we are too quick to label people good and evil, and I am one that understands that. But by the same token, sometimes there is actual true evil out there in the world, and you need to be careful of that as well. But here, in the era of villainy, people might label you as evil for acting the way you're acting, but you're not evil, and there's nothing wrong with prioritizing your own well-being. If you don't do it, who will? Malala Yousafzai and other characters like Maleficent have been cast as villains simply for standing out in their truth. For men, the concept also applies in rejecting toxic masculinity. Instead of conforming to rigid expectations of aggression and dominance, embracing the villain era might mean choosing vulnerability and emotional intelligence, despite societal pushback, because they're going to say, well, you're a man. Why are you doing that? Just go in there, take charge, and kick ass. And you say, I don't want to. I want to get off the crazy train and live life the way I want. People look at you like, well, what's his problem? Modern media has embraced the idea of the necessary villain. Characters like Loki, Killmonger, Severus Snape are complex figures who challenge the idea of absolute morality. They're not evil for the sake of evil. Rather, they operate from a place of conviction, often exposing the flaws in the systems around them. Even if you ever saw Wicked, you have the Wicked Witch of the West, who in the Wizard of Oz is portrayed as an absolute villain, but in Wicked, you get to see the other side of the story, and a story that's told a little bit differently. And you see that the Wicked Witch is not actually evil at all. It was the system that was oppressing her the entire time that became emergent as the true evil. So the era of villainy is not about harming others or becoming needlessly antagonistic. It's about shedding the fear of rejection, embracing one's inner truth, and understanding that not everyone will appreciate the role that one plays in their story. Just as spiritual leaders, philosophers, and revolutionaries have faced opposition for challenging the status quo, so too must those who choose to stand firm in their own convictions. Do not shrink yourself for anyone. Do not act like the person who goes along to get along. Be the misunderstood hero. You're not going to always be loved, but you need to always transform. You need to always ascend. You need spiritual breakthroughs. You need psychological insights. It becomes clear that this era is not only a personal necessity, but a profound, divinely aligned mission. The challenge then is not becoming the villain, but having the courage to accept the role fully, knowing that the greatest lessons often come wrapped in uncomfortable truths. For example, on one of my previous videos, I had an individual just chime in, and he's trying to be this sort of holier than thou person. Like, oh, you've reached conclusions that are based on faulty premises, and, you've mixed concepts that show a true lack of understanding of the material you're talking about, and blah, blah, blah. Now, if it had come to pass that maybe he had some information to offer, actually something that was a counterpoint, like, hey, you talked about this specific concept here. Might I have you think about A, B, and C? So now the person is giving you constructive criticism, right? Because they're not just saying, oh, you suck, right? They're saying, you might be wrong on some things, and we can debate about it and talk about it. Here are some ideas. Here are some suggestions. Take it or leave it. If you want to dialogue with me further, go ahead. That is a constructive way of approaching someone. But when all you do is say, well, this is clearly precocious banter that lacks any real substance, and then that's shots fired. And when you're doing that, you're not serving any purpose. All you're doing is either making yourself seem better or just using the opportunity to bring someone down and attack them. That won't be tolerated with me, because maybe in the past I would have indulged people in some sorts of back and forth arguments, and I was known for that for many years. Many people called me the guy who would go back and forth. People would write novels of responses, dissecting their arguments, argument by argument, paragraph by paragraph, with a detailed counter response till the day is long, until eventually we talked ourselves blue in the face. I don't do that anymore. So as for this person who commented in the other video, I just simply banned them. And that's it. And I can't be bothered. So, oh my God, I'm the villain. Okay, sue me. Right? Anyways, that is the point. Don't let anyone jerk you around. Don't let anyone take you for granted. Don't let anyone make you feel less than treasured. Because if they don't understand the gift, then they don't need it in their lives. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you're new here, this is a safe space. If you're returning, I love and appreciate you so much, and I'm glad that you're back. In the name of the Most High God, I wish you health, wealth, prosperity, and abundance. Blessings and protection. Signing off. Take care. Have a great day.